Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Oscar, he, him, and I am on a podquest to learn everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And I'm delighted to be joined by Guillaume. Guillaume, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hi. So I'm a corporate strategy associate director at King. I've been in games for 8 years now, and always been a gamer my whole life. My title can be a little bit complicated. So, like, what does that actually mean? That means that I look at the market, I try to understand what are the trends, where the next thing is going to appear, and I use a lot of market information to advise King leadership and our game teams to understand what is the next thing that they should focus on, either because something that we want to do, or maybe something that's maybe becoming a potential obstacle for us. So we use all of this information to put it together. And I just want to say, as a slight disclaimer, that all of the views that I have are going to be my own and not of the company. But very happy to be here.
And the fact is that, this is, I think, a fascinating area. As a trained marketeer, I grew up on pest and slept, political, economic, social, legal, technological, all these levers, all these market factors that any industry would have. And of course, in games, we also have, the rise and fall of genre, of style, of innovation, of technique. Is 3D realism the factor of the day, or is simple indie casual mechanics and narrative the thing that's going to be interesting? I think for a lot of game studios, they're often coming at it from the point of view of, I want to make this game. But actually, the more professional, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way to people who are more indie, but the people who are dealing with more commercial endeavors, I think, have to think about the market in a more strategic way. And I think that's a fascinating area. So when you're, when you're looking at games, when you're looking at kind of the market, what's your first port of call? What's the first thing you're thinking about when you're trying to understand market conditions, or the kinds of games that you think might be interesting at a particular time?
Yeah. So the way that I usually like to think about it is just trying to understand where is that the market is heading towards. I feel like there's usually a very big tendency among more creative people, no fault of theirs, but to try to just be unique and different and carve out their own space on their own. Um, Not that there isn't any merit in it, because there is, and there can be
Mm.
a very strong innovation in it. But then many times that does lead into what uh, can be a bit of a struggle, and you just get stuck into a loop and none of it really clicks and nothing it really works. So I like to look at, okay, where is the market organically already going into,
Yeah.
and then seeing if in those spaces there's room to innovate, to out execute, to do better than what is already available there. Maybe mashing up already existing concepts and things like that, to then try to um, yeah, see if whatever we're able to create is a success or not.
And there are some fantastic kind of like technique. I love the way you describe that. There, look for where the market is going. Try to see where we can stand out, or innovate, or adapt, or merge things in order to be able to take advantage of that. To my mind, one of the things I think I often hear, and this isn't just a games thing, is we want to be at the B of the bang. We want to be. We need to be getting up before the wave hits. To take a terrible surfing analogy, because you can probably tell I don't surf, but if you're getting up after the wave's gone, there's nothing there. You're
Yeah,
going to fail. So you've got to kind of be ahead of that curve, or you've got to find ways of being able to adapt. And I think it's a really interesting challenge, because I think it depends, obviously, what kind of skill sets your team have, what that team wants to get involved with, but also, is there an audience? Does that make sense?
yeah, and I think you're totally right that you really need to find that right balance of, okay, not trying to create something way ahead of the market being ready for it, but also not being too slow, and then you try to launch something and you're already out of it.
Yeah,
So I think the real way to try to prevent situations like these is just to make sure that whenever you're working on a new game, that you have fast processes, that you're agile, that you can pivot.
yeah,
You can iterate multiple times, and if something's not working, then go on to the next one. I mean, it's something that we see in tech all the time, right? There's a reason why when there was the crypto boom, suddenly everyone was working on some crypto related game,
yeah,
and then now is AI, and everyone has AI somewhere in their pitch, right? So the
yeah,
same way that kind of when you go fundraising, you need to find what ticks with what people need to listen. I think gamers are a bit different. Like we're not like VCs or anything like that that need to be courted, and we have I
yeah.
think stronger preferences than VCs maybe, but
We
but I
have
think
passions.
yes, exactly. But still there is some room to, I feel, if you know what is resonating with one part of the market, then it's probably true that it will resonate with others,
Yeah,
and just maybe trying to find your own little take on it, and then maybe your own little take can become something really big.
yeah. I mean, for me, I typically start by trying to think about what does the team consider success. I know that sounds like inward facing, but I think it's important for particularly smaller teams who don't necessarily have a strategic direction to work out what they actually want to achieve, and to then use that lens to then look at what's happening in the market and what audience, where they can find where an audience already is. I think that's kind of like ties into something you said earlier there. Um, but the idea that we're looking at that as a vector, as a direction, not just oh, there's an audience there and they're static. I don't think things are static, particularly in a creative space like this. So it's hard to have these things that we can hold on to that allow us to have a strategy and direction when everything moves. But I think you can do that by understanding what success looks like first, and then looking at market data to see how you can best apply, what you know about the market. Does that make sense to you as well? I mean, is that
No, I think it
familiar
makes
or
sense, and yeah, it's familiar to to my daily
yeah,
life, like using a plethora of data, market data,
yeah.
keeping an eye on what's going on outside, and just
But what
understanding.
sort of market data are you looking at?
So we use a lot of like Sensor Tower
Yeah,
and other providers, um, and just understanding, okay, how is the top line evolving? How are gross
yeah,
bookings evolving? Some challenges into the mix now with web shop and trying
yeah.
to get a full picture of things. No one really has advertising revenue nailed, I think. So that's another area that's still, um,
That's an area that's completely changed in terms of
yeah,
strategy, and I would argue almost also hasn't. But that's a long debate in itself.
yeah. But we look at top line and then we kind
Yeah,
of see, okay, that's the starting point. But then trying to understand uh, who are the main drivers of that top line. So because then, okay, we can try to see who are the people that are innovating the most, and then going a bit deeper into kind of a KPI tree of what is driving the success in those specific examples to try to understand, okay, what is really ticking in the market.
so I mean, to my mind, I'm going to try and splice that out. So for people who don't have a background in this kind of way of thinking, um, in my head, I think of the things like the general market trend. So that's for me is things like Newzoo are a typical example where they'll say this is the size of the mobile market, this is the rate of change that we've seen over the last year, this is the forecast of the growth levels we've seen. We might similarly see some of that information going into a bit more depth with someone like I forgot the name of the company. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of teams that are doing deeper analysis. I did a whole bunch of analysis on a friend of mine's company who's just gone from my head for the name of the company at the moment, but they did a fantastic set of analysis in terms of specifically looking at live ops being an area that has grown enormously over the last 10 years in particular. And they looked at some trends in the way live ops games were operated and some factors within that. And so you've got Newzoo, which are looking at kind of like high level numbers, and these other teams that are looking at panels of groups of people who have particular levels of insight and able to go into a bit more depth in a particular topic. But then, like you mentioned, Sensor Tower, where you've got them abstracting data from market sources like Apple and Google ranking charts, but then augmenting that with real game data to try to estimate, and it is just an estimate, what everybody is therefore earning. I don't know how you deal with it, because I think these different data types give me different values, different benefits of different scales, and also I trust them at different levels. The only one I really trust is when it's my data for my games, because I know that's true.
And that's a constant. It's a constant exercise that we need to do, right? Because even though there is so much data out there, for us at our level, it's really important to make sure that it's as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
So whenever we have a new conversation with a potential vendor or something like that, and my team, and I also do this on a weekly/monthly basis, that there's always someone trying to pitch something new. The first question is always, what does it look like? How deep is it? What is the methodology? And can I get access to some trial data to just compare to how it looks with us? Because from there we can kind of understand how confident we can be or not. And there were some examples where they were spectacularly off. So just from there,
boy, do I know how off they can be. Oh my goodness.
so
I remember a friend of mine had it wasn't CSR, it was a similar game, and he was being told by one of the companies that he was earning twice as much as he actually was.
Yeah. Sometimes it would be good if it was true, but
that'd be great if it was true.
But yeah, so we start from there, and then as to when we use different types of data, I think the Newzoo and other companies like that, they're good to give you a macro perspective of where the market is going, but each one of them, I think, has their strong points and maybe some weak points. Okay, maybe they focus a bit more Newzoo specifically PC console. If we want mobile, they've moved away a little bit from that area in the latest years. So, but there's other parts that other companies will be better, and so part of it is also just trying to understand where do they excel in, so that you can make the best use of what they're giving you. And I would say that the ones that we use the most on a daily basis, just because of where we work, the space we work in, is just mobile. So mobile for us is really important. And for that, we'll have
what
to
a shocker.
And so for that, we'll have to rely on Sensor Tower for a lot of the analysis. There are other providers that we also have a good relationship with, AppMagic, some others that have also done excellent work to try to get to alternative numbers. And so we use a little bit of a combination, and not to be too dependent on any of them. Also, constantly, on a weekly basis, keeping a check versus our own numbers to just make sure that things don't deviate too much. And then
you can go into much more detail with your own numbers. So, for example, for me, what I'm interested in is not just, I'm simplifying. I know Sensor are doing more than this, but at a base level, they're knowing that I'm going to get this kind of ranking comparison pit going on, that there'll be some interpretation, or at least interpolation, of the different games that they've got data from that can give them some assessment. But for me, I'm going to be looking at sentiment. I'm going to be looking at progress through first-time user experience. I'm going to be looking at different levels of retention. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these market data aren't telling you how much is being spent by that team on ads. that it's not, you're not getting an idea of how much they're spending on streamers, for example. There's a lot of invisible numbers, and particularly if you add to that with Apple removing the IDFA, there's a whole bunch of empty data that we Apple users that we're having no information about whatsoever, that I personally think is shifting the biases, making it really hard to make judgment calls. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
it's a bit of a inaccurate science to try to understand what is really sometimes driving performance in these underlying metrics. And so we always try
Yeah.
to keep an eye on, okay, is it user acquisition? Like, are they doing a marketing push? Is it more product driven? And
Yeah.
so we need to have a bit of again, a range of data providers. And all of this suddenly starts to get very expensive. And I know it's not in everyone's reach, especially if, like, maybe you're a small developer just getting
Yeah.
started. You're not going to have the budget for all of this. So
I mean, it's
we are,
hugely expensive
yes,
for
we are
small
in a
people. Yeah.
privilege. We are in
Yeah.
a privileged situation to have access to all of this data, but I think it also just unlocks the the best insights that you can do, and then
Yeah.
guide your decisions in the best way. Which, at our level, if you're like 1% off, 1% is a lot. So
Yeah.
we need to make
Absolutely.
sure
Yeah.
we are as spot on as we can.
And I mean, I think people don't understand necessarily the relatively low margins that a mobile game has compared to, say, a PC game. I mean, I say relatively, but the reason I'm saying that is because cost of acquisition has been going up enormously. It's very reliant on retention. I'm not just talking about King here. This is about all mobile games, and I spend long hours working through spreadsheets of a whole number of different types and styles of mobile game and PC game too. The getting the margin right, given the cost of development, is an incredibly tricky thing. And when you're dealing with the scale that you guys are going to, it's the classic case of are you looking at a day 30 return on advertising spend, or a day 60 return on advertising spend, or a day 120? I've seen people doing more longer than day 120 return on advertising spend. That's not profit. That's just getting enough money back in from that user to make the original user acquisition spend viable. And to my mind, that's why I think it's so important that we get as much information as possible so we know what good looks like.
Yeah, and definitely the market is more and more competitive. A lot of big players with big budgets these days trying to scale up. It has become one of the big factors of success.
Yeah.
There are still, like, some people trying to use IP to try to go around that a little bit. But in the end, I feel like having strong IP that people recognize and leads to organic downloads, it's kind of just a bit of a discount on how much you actually need to spend
Yeah.
on marketing,
Oh,
because
I
it
mean,
won't
to
take the
my
whole day.
mind, yeah, and to my mind, I mean, I could bore for hours on why I think we should be doing integrated marketing. To me, integrated marketing is the IP, so the brand value, but it's also what we spend on paid. It's also how we invest in the community. It's also how we invest in streamers and other content creators. It's also how we invest in the reasons for you to return to the game. And the game itself is, for me, part of that mix. But anyway, I can bore for hours on that stuff. So we're reaching out for these third party platforms. I mean, for me, I'm also interested personally in making sure that whilst I've got primary data from my players, I'm also keen to go and get additional primary sources of data. So for me, that looks like things like using tools like Playtest Cloud or other survey based responses in order to get qualitative responses to what we're doing. Does that have a role in strategic thinking, or is that more focused on the development of the game itself for you?
I think for me, I might be a bit biased,
Mm,
but just throughout my professional experience, I always
yeah,
have a little bit of a cynic view of maybe some of the survey data. I know Playtest Cloud is not
yeah,
surveys, like people are actually playing the game and that you
yeah.
get
It's
data
actually
back
people.
from
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
it's like it's real data.
Yeah.
But doing a playtest, or maybe when you go a bit more out into survey data, personas, stuff like this,
Yeah.
there is a place for it. I know that
Yeah.
like it's a can be a valuable resource when you're trying to market the game and this understanding who it could be for. But personally, I prefer looking at performance numbers. So
Yeah.
if we have a prototype, if we do this change in the product, or if we do this change in the marketing, how does it actually impact the KPIs? And then I look at the tests and like player interviews and things like that as more of as a supporting evidence, more than what maybe should be driving the key decisions, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I mean, because I got trained in kind of classical consumer market driven stuff when in telcos. I was the games guy, but I was in the telco context. We had lots of access to reports on things like consumer trend reports that might be going into like the tween market and how they were adopting mobile devices early on, or you might have women 35 to 45, and there'd be a detailed assessment. And again, that would be more survey data rather than. I think GFK, as I vaguely, I think I think it got bought by someone once. But anyway, reports like that we found really. In fact, actually, I think back in the day, GFK bought a thing called Chart Track. Chart Track being the retail game reports. I think GFK did a lot of retail reports as well. But I just vaguely remember teams like that were also giving us these larger panel surveys where you might have 250 people, 1,000 people, whatever, who would be regularly interviewed on various topics, and sometimes those topics would include relevant material for games, and therefore it was quite interesting. But I'm with you. I always felt like it was telling me something I either already knew or that was past, and therefore not the thing I wanted to do now, if that makes sense.
And I also feel like it can be hard, especially when you're trying to innovate. And going back to
Mm.
the point of if you're wanting to create something new, if it might be hard for people to understand what is the concept of what you, because they have these ideas. Okay, I want this, I like this. So if you try to move away a little bit from that and you are fully reliant on a player interview, maybe they won't fully get it, or maybe they will be afraid because it has some sort of connotation what you're trying to propose, instead of actually just putting the product in their hands and then showing how does it actually perform once they get to it. I understand it's at different stages because you won't be able to have a prototype right at the beginning, so there will have to be like some abstraction. But that's just why I kind of sometimes discount a little bit the more abstract
Yeah,
questioning and things like that, and I prefer when there is a product and there is data linked to the product. I think that's much
yeah.
stronger.
No, I totally get it. I mean, I always found that a good tie, or a good mindset to it was to use the qualitative style reports to be able to form the questions that I want to then measure. And I
Yeah.
might be measuring those questions in terms of the triggers I put into the gameplay in order to see what people actually do when presented with those options. Or it might be looking at attribution data. So people have said they like this kind of thing, but actually, what is the difference in the cost for install? Or even maybe I haven't got a game yet, and I'm doing a just a uh some people call it fake ad, but experimental like proposition of what a game might be, where you might put a trailer out that for a game that doesn't yet fully exist, and you're just getting a sense of the CPM. How attractive is that idea? And I think the survey stuff can be useful for me to work out, rather than just my idea, what does this audience say they like? Well, let's prove whether that's true or not. Is that something that you've done, or do you have other ways that you try to solve that problem?
So I think that like the main way that we do is that we look at data, and then because of where I sit within the whole structure
Yeah,
in corporate strategy, I'm more like an external advisor.
yeah,
So I I provide like recommendations. Okay, what we look at the data, what we look at how everything is performing, but also when we play the games, because we also play like other games, our games, competitor games, a bunch of
yeah,
games. I've been a gamer like all my life, across all the platforms. So I understand. To me, like I have this feeling of okay, what does actually work? What resonates? What doesn't? What made me as a player do this type of decision? And I think it's always good to try to complement your data analysis with your own experience of playing the games,
yeah.
and
I see.
then with that I provide recommendations, like for the product teams and things like that, for like if it's very specific, it will be to the product teams directly. If it's broader trends of okay, we see this genre subgenre doing very well, we should consider it and things like that. That will be more like higher level to leadership. But yeah, that's usually my role into the whole process.
No, no, I get it, and I think that so moving from market data to competitive data, I think is really fascinating. Are you more interested? I know this is where I often find that when I'm looking at competitive data, I'm coming in quite late to when I start looking at competitive data. If I were doing it clean, I would want to pay attention to what games are being announced by which teams over time and try to understand what audiences they were targeting. But I almost never get to actually do it that way. Instead, I tend to be, my game is going to be this. Can you tell me how this will do? And then I mean, I don't do consultancy stuff as much as I used to. But what we what I've tended to do is then, oh, okay, this is the subgenre of game these people are trying to create. It has these design flavors that I want to identify as what I think the audience is going to be attracted by. What are the games that have that subgenre and meet these particular playing criteria? And I then use that to try to assess, okay, how do those games seem to perform? Who's making those games? What's the visibility of those games in a common parlance? What's the sentiment analysis of the communities of those games? What's the reviews and ratings, and how is the imagery for those games looking on the store pages, things like that? So that's how would tend to come at it.
Yeah,
How would you look at it in your kind of like corporate kind of like just working out what the shape of the market looks like?
yeah, I prefer looking at almost from the beginning and
Hmm.
on a constant basis. So I know not everyone is going to have the same like competitive intelligence mindset as I do. Some
Yeah,
people, like we were talking about earlier, they're very creative. They have their own passions, their own visions, and this is what they want to do. Um, but I feel like that sometimes can become a blocker for you to be aware of okay, what is going on in the market. And so
yeah,
that's why, in my opinion, it's really important to just be like expose yourself to a lot of different things out there. Play as much as you can play on your own time, um, because if you understand what is, or even if you're not playing these days, you can just like watch streams, you can watch shorts, you can watch whatever. There's so many different ways for you to understand what is out there and what is sticking with
yeah,
players. That then I feel like you don't necessarily need to just follow what other people are doing, but it it points the direction of what could be interesting, and again puts us in the vector of things that could interest players. So I see it as almost it needs to be there from the start, and not just okay, I'm working and this is the idea and this is the concept, maybe a prototype, and okay, now let's look at the market and just benchmark and see what it could look like.
yeah,
So I just like to have this thing right from the get-go, and then maybe along the way as you're making your own thing, you'll start to realize, oh, okay, maybe actually there was this game that had this element that I really liked. Let me just bring that in and see how I can adapt it to my own type of
yeah,
game.
yeah.
And this
Absolutely.
is something we see all the time, right? Because gameplay mechanics kind of usually come from um, hyper casual, casual, and then to more core markets, and monetization goes the other way. So
Yeah,
monetization is super
totally.
intensive because it's fundamental, like when you're in the casino side, and then people find ways to maybe make it a bit more fun, more related to gameplay, more something.
Yeah, more
But there's
valuable
just
to the
this,
player.
yeah, exactly, and
Yeah.
there's this, like I don't know, crisscross of ideas and things that if you're not aware of what goes on in the market, you can have an excellent idea, but will it really stand out and will it really be unique and will it combine things in the best way possible, or will it just be like a great idea but then when it actually ships or like you get close to executing, something is missing, right? Or maybe yeah, it's just not as good as it could be.
No, totally good. And I really like the way that playing on your own time, I think, is a massively important statement. One of the things I like to do is if I'm doing an analysis of a game, I will not expense any money I spent in that game. Because if I do, then I'm just testing the mechanics of it. I'm not testing the feel of it. If it's not something I'm willing to spend money on, why would anyone else?
Yeah.
So, that to me is a kind of key factor of that. And like you also said, it's the diversity. Even though you might be looking at a particular genre or a subgenre, it's actually important to play a diverse range of games in order. Because, I mean, I've lost track of how many games I've played. It's got to be in the hundreds of thousands, and or at least getting close to. The point of that, though, is that I've lost track of which mechanic I learned from what system. I don't
Mhm.
have a brain that thinks, photographically about where I found something, but I do have a system brain and the ability to see how you could then interpret way of playing for the games that you're working that would attract that particular audience in a particular style. I think it's incredibly powerful. But also, it goes back to where you started, the vector that the different teams are going on in their discovery and delivery of their next games comes down to how are they building from that previous game. Even back to the first thing you said about finding the thing, what people are doing, and how you can stand out, how you can add something. I seem to remember Disney had a mechanism that they called plussing, which was to strip a game down to its basic and then just add one thing. But I think there's an alternative way of looking at plussing. I can't remember if this is the Disney one or the other one was, which is you look at the one thing that people love the most about the game and double down on that. And it sounds very similar. They are subtly different, though.
Yeah.
And I think these techniques, these ways of looking at games and thinking about how are people moving, where is the direction of travel, how are audiences responding to that, I think is absolutely key to understanding how they're going to effectively respond to the games you're proposing.
Yeah. And I feel like it also, like, we have a budget that theoretically we could expense with things that we're
Yeah,
doing as part of just testing out games in the market. But
100%.
in 3 years that I've been at the company, I've never used it, and no one in my team uses it because it really just goes back to the point that you were saying that the biggest proof of something working is you realizing that wait, I actually want to pay for this, and this is like it's been less than 5 games in my whole life, like on mobile, that I've spent, and those 5 games were really good,
Yeah.
right? And there's also like other things because I know myself, right? It's sometimes a bit weird because I feel like I understand the patterns and what the game teams are trying to do, like from competitor games even. Um, so I understand like what loops they're trying to get me into, and so I
Yeah.
conscientiously remove myself, right? And so kind of break that. But I can definitely feel like if I was just a normal player that is not in the industry that doesn't understand how the sausage is made, that then suddenly you just follow a certain uh, intended path that maybe someone had for your type of player, your type of the way that you engage with games, and that this thing is really gonna make you tick.
Yeah.
So like one of the main examples for this is just like merge 2. since
Mm.
I've started at King, like maybe a bit before, I was really into Merge Mansion. Merge Mansion had like a very strong period. It was one of the games that I paid for just out of my own pocket. Um,
Yeah,
and
it's a
then
great game.
it's a great game. But then at some point I churned because it was just taking up too much time. And I always got this reticence of, okay, should I go back into Merge 2 or not? And then Gossip Harbor came out. Gossip Harbor is just doing amazingly.
Yeah,
And uh, I held off from playing it. Like I knew what it was about. I saw a lot of things on Live Ops and Game Refinery and whatnot. So I knew what it was about, but I didn't play it. And then I played it for 3 weeks and I was like, okay, I need to uninstall this because the game is too good, you know?
no,
So
I get it. I get it. I
yeah.
mean, it's an interesting one because I have that happen to me quite often, but I also have the opposite where I go in and I play a game, and actually Monopoly Go is an example of this, where it is not for me at all,
Yep.
but I can't help admire it. You know, I don't particularly like the kind of drive in it personally. However, what I admire is the sheer talent of the people who pulled it together, and the finesse and the expertise and the precision of the kind of game they've made. Now, if you like that kind of game, and I know some people do, some people don't, it is a beautiful example of how to deliver and execute in that world. But I'm still stuck as a person who likes games, not liking it as
I'm in the
for
same boat.
me. Yeah,
I'm in the same boat. I look at it and I can see how it's very well done. Uh, but yeah, I did play it a bit when it came out, but then I didn't stick to it. There are people here at King who have played a lot longer than me.
yeah.
There's other stuff that just yeah, makes me tick differently. Like not necessarily Monopoly though.
No, I know what you mean. There are lots of examples of games like that. I just feel that's a safe one to throw out because
Yeah.
I think people will understand where I'm coming from pretty easily. So we talked a bit about competitive space. We've talked a bit about general market trends. We haven't talked about like how much attention are you paying to for example, the regulatory environment or you know the more political context. The reason I ask is I've been I'm of the opinion, and this is my view, and I don't necessarily think anyone else needs to share it, that a lot of the ways that regulation has been brought in the last year or so, particularly the Online Safety Bill, Digital Markets Act, and the upcoming Digital Fairness Acts, are being directed at smaller well, they're being directed at the developer rather than the platform. And I'm worried it's creating a bigger and bigger burden on creating games for smaller teams. So I think one of the factors there is that we're creating governments, because of the way they're regulating, are creating barriers to smaller companies addressing the market. Now, that may or may not be true. It's my opinion. But the reason I mention it is because with regulatory bodies taking a more directed stance, does that mean you need to pay more attention to what they're doing? Does it mean you guys feel like you have to get involved in conversations with regulatory bodies? How does it affect your role in this strategic assessment of the market?
It's something that definitely we pay close attention to.
Mm.
Um, Not just on the EU proposed bills and the ones that have already been enacted, but
Yeah,
also just when it comes to the App Store fees and what are the
exactly.
guidelines
Absolute fees are classic about it. The Epic versus Apple
and Google
and Google. Yeah,
and now Google doing their own changes and Apple doing their own changes and
yeah.
it feels like every 6 months or something there's new rules. So it's definitely a space that we need to
Yeah.
maneuver in. Um,
And by the
Not
way, I'm
sure.
not asking for a comment on
Yeah.
how King feel about it at all.
No.
I just think it's
That's
an
what I was going to say.
important.
I'm not sure how
Yeah.
much more in detail I can go. I can just
No,
say
and you
that
shouldn't. Yeah.
we definitely pay close attention to all the
Yeah.
regulations, and we find the best way to navigate through them.
Yeah.
complying with them.
Oh, obviously. I mean, where I'm coming with this is to for the audience to pay attention to the fact that these changes affect everybody, and it's not what the specifics are saying. It's about the fact that we have to comply with these changes, but that affects the way we look at the market as well. Is kind of where I was trying to get to.
Yeah.
But I mean, would you agree with that?
I think it can put some burdens. I think the one that we're keeping a closer eye on is the fairness one,
Yeah, digital fairness
because
one. That's going to be
that could have big implications for just the whole way that free to play operates. But yeah, let's just see what happens.
Oh, I have so many thoughts on. I occasionally have podcasts with Celia Ponton about this. Who Celia is one of the people at Flux who works with regulators, discussing kind of the market and how the regulators are approaching this. And we're very concerned between us about what the implications could be, particularly because the way the original ones were wording wasn't dealing with the fundamental issue. It was actually dramatically affecting game design principles, which, yeah, again, opinions of mine, not anybody else's.
Yeah,
And I'm not trying to ask for any comment about what particular companies might think about them. My point is, again, we are in a dynamic space, and some of these elements are going to change the flavor of the teams that are able to bring games to market and to scale those games. And I would imagine that that's going to affect the way you're looking about the direction of the market, which audiences are going to become accessible or not accessible, where gaps are going to start appearing. And that's what I think would be interesting to understand of how you think about how regulatory, legal, as well as the kind of core market conditions affect the way you think.
yeah. I think what we have been seeing is just the way I see things is just a lot of movement going on in newer markets that maybe were not as present in the
Yeah,
history of the games industry, um, and really coming up to the fore. Or maybe in like the Asian giants, the China,
yeah,
Japan, Korea, they used to be a lot more domestic focused, and now
yes,
that's changing. Also because of regulation, right? Because there
yeah,
was um, a lot of different changes that happened specifically in China,
very much so.
limits that were imposed on like the internal market, and then the companies had to look abroad. And when they looked abroad, then suddenly there were a bigger presence where we were as well.
Yeah,
So
100%.
this is definitely something that it's not just impacting us directly; it's also impact us in markets that maybe were not as big, but then leads to other companies wanting to broaden their reach and things like that.
What I
So
think is interesting about that, though, as well, is I think that that also affected us to a certain extent culturally, because audiences were being exposed to different styles of art, different styles of storytelling in games, different kinds of gameplay, different mechanics. And I think in some ways, they didn't just create a commercial kind of, not threat, but kind of commercial difference, but also introduce a cultural slant as well, to some extent. Does that make sense?
yeah, but what I find interesting is how you have a lot of companies, especially in China, that are
Yeah,
trying to some of them keep their own cultural flavor.
yeah,
You had like Black Myth Wukong did extremely well, excellent game,
yeah. Excellent.
fully focused on a key Chinese legend. I think I
Yeah,
can call it that. And then at the same time, you have other games that completely try to portray themselves as being a Western game, but they're made by
yeah.
Chinese developers, and they're very well done. Like Ossip Harbor is one of them, right? The company
Absolutely.
is Chinese. Um, Block Blast, super famous all over,
Yeah.
and it's made by a Chinese company. So, and you wouldn't necessarily look at them and say that, oh, these are Chinese games. They're like whatever,
No,
whatever.
not at all.
Uh, they're just great games done by people who are really good at what they do, who really understand the market, and I
Mm,
think we'll just see more and more of them.
yeah.
And yeah, so it's something that we also keep in mind.
I do remember going out to Beijing just before COVID, literally like weeks before COVID, and sorry, nothing connect, no correlation. But I got to meet some amazing Chinese developers out in Beijing, talking about the way because at the time they were focused very much on the hyper casual space, but they were emerging out of that, and we had Habby were there as well. So the Archera guys, 13 billion, the guys who did Art of War Legions were there as well. Seeing teams like that able to see how not only they got to the stage where their craft was then on a par with more Western developers, their the way that they were looking forward to creating new kinds of games that were going to compete at a global level, and the way they were looking to Western developers to kind of give them insight, I thought it was amazing. Really, really fascinating to see that innovation happening at that time, and that would have been 2019. So it it's nearly 7 years ago. Oh my god! But the point I'm trying to get to is it's amazing how we have seen these areas which maybe weren't at the cutting edge of development are suddenly becoming the cutting edge. And when the talent, the skills, the resources start being more global, and particularly in my mind, goes beyond what game to make and starts coming into the more strategic areas of how to develop games and the rise, I think, of codev, particularly post COVID. Does that impact the way you look at your kind of recommendations at all?
Not sure how much detail I can go into that.
That's
Um,
fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't feel like you have to.
yeah, but I feel
But
like
it's
it's definitely a thing that we're seeing, and it's not just, even though I've mentioned China a lot, it's not just China. We've seen Vietnam doing very well.
yeah, Vietnam, absolutely, yeah, yeah,
A lot of excellent developers in there, and then a bit closer to Europe, you also have like the whole Turkish scene that's booming,
oh,
and
yeah,
yeah, I mean, rightfully, like they're doing very well. But so it's definitely a consideration because, and we've seen this in patterns in okay, where maybe some studios or layoffs happen and things like that, and there seems to be at least some shift of investments that were being made in the West, and then
yeah,
maybe pulled back a little bit and focused on in other areas, um, because there wasn't necessarily the requirement
yeah.
to be in like very expensive locations, and so that is something that is looked at. But um, with this, I'm not saying that like King specifically is
But
doing this or anything
oh
like that.
no,
I'm just saying
absolutely, yeah.
it's it's definitely a market trend that you can see by
Yeah.
just checking the news.
And I think what I think's interesting about it is that it means that we have to think more strategically about what we're making and why the team we have are making this game. To me, it's not a case of I'm not suggesting anybody should be going out necessarily just dumping their game development to another country. That's not what I think is going on here. I don't think that's what's happening with Codev. I think what's happening is that we're using our local resources to make the core experience and then looking at how we can supplement that with other resources. And I'm saying that as somebody who's got a company that's based in Scotland that was then, we then moved ourselves to Belgium. We still have our Scottish entity, we have a Belgian entity, because even as a relatively small tech company, it matters to us to be set up in a strategic way that works, internationally. It's not just a single country industry, I would argue.
And
Um,
the more you go into like very intensive, large scale games with a lot of live ops and things like that, that's
yeah,
probably where you're going to see the biggest benefits in also expanding your presence and tapping into other talent pools and things like that. Of course, there's the whole matter of AI, which surprisingly we're deep into this conversation and we haven't really talked much about it. Um,
amazing.
but it's not just like everyone starts using AI tools. It's also just exploring how other people work and their own
Yes.
creativity, their own perspective, their own flavor, like that they can bring to the whole experience. And I think it's a great way of doing it. Um, Garena Free Fire, for example, is one of the games that, in terms of localization, I think it's second to none.
Yeah.
With just the amount of live ops that they do on the country
I agree.
level, which is really impressive. So I feel like yes, there's definitely room for codev and to explore what's abroad, just in general, because the market's just it's really great to see how the talent is so qualified and really excellent, uh, almost anywhere you look,
Yeah.
and uh, we should
But it
protect it
means that
as
we've
much
got
as
a
we can.
richer, deeper market to explore, which means I think we have to pay more attention. So, I mean, as we to bring this kind of to a conclusion, essentially. So, we've talked about how we're assessing a market, we're assessing competitors, we're looking at kind of the wider social, political, technical, legal aspects as well. But now we're coming back to our game and coming kind of to the game. How are you using that information to validate either the new games that you're thinking about bringing into market, or how you validate what you do with the games that you already have? What sort of techniques? And again, I'm not after specifics on specific games, obviously. However, as a principle, if somebody out there is wanting to learn how best to use this information to validate games, what would you suggest they think about?
I think going back a little bit to what we talked about earlier, it's really about just seeing how you're performing. I think market data, comparative intelligence, is good because it gives you benchmarks that otherwise you wouldn't have.
Yeah,
So if you see that, I don't know, you're working on some live op, and if you don't really, you cannot A/B test what other people do because you don't have their data, you don't have
no,
controls and treatment groups, but you kind of infer that if everything else was the same, and suddenly they launched something new, that this was about the impact that it had, right, for the
yeah,
period that it launched. So when with this, and you gather a few more examples of maybe other companies that did something similar, and you start to get a like some range of estimate that you can expect your thing that you're working on to, uh, like the impact that it has on the performance to be somewhat similar. And
yeah,
if it doesn't, then okay, maybe it's back to the drawing board. What did we really nail what we were trying to do, what we were trying to deliver to the players, or um, is is something missing? And if we want, and if maybe it went way beyond what everyone is doing, also trying to understand why. So I think all of this data just is, the goal is to gather as much as you can so that you can really get a broad and as full as possible view of what is going on in each of the games, so that you can understand how they work, how players react to them, and then continue to build upon it so that you can deliver the best experience that you can to your players.
yeah. No, completely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, to my mind, I think there's so many different ways of looking at how to leverage data. I think using that market, competitor, political environment, etc., etc., to understand where the market is moving and how you can keep aligned with that, and ideally just at that kind of edge to make that work is a fantastically important thing. If you can supplement that with specific data in the game, with specific um, uh, programs, but I think also to a certain extent it's a bit like you were saying earlier about being able to play freely, but to think about the player in design more freely, to try to forecast what it might be, to try to think about, if you put yourself in the position of that player, understanding those market trends and then what they would want next,
Yep.
and then testing that. Um, I think that's the bottom line at the end of the day. It's for me, it's like look at the look at the environment to form your questions, and then test those questions.
Yep. And play the things like play the other things and just
Yeah.
put yourself in the player's shoes, right? Because
Yeah. Exactly.
you know your own preferences, and if there's something you like this type of games and you work in this industry and you understand the things that you're building, and then if there's
Yeah.
something else that you play and it really resonates with you somehow, there's probably a reason for that, and to try to understand why, and is it a me thing or actually something that other people would be interested in, and then it's when
Absolutely.
you start to expand and trying to experiment more, and then is when you kind of are like you enable yourself to reach the next breakthrough, I think.
No, completely. And I think this is where the skill lies. When you it's not just being able to understand data and understand what, having some basic understanding of statistics that matters here. It's I think having a vibe, a gut feel as well, and be able to take this combination between vibe and reinforced by data mindset. I think that really triggers it, and I think to me that makes all the difference. So, if you were an indie developer or a double A developer out there, what do you think that they could learn? What would you want them to learn from the way the AAA, the larger teams operate? What do you think are the biggest lessons that you would want them to pay attention to?
I think I think what's been really inspiring, like especially if you're a small developer, is just seeing how the market on PC console has been doing
Yeah.
recently. A
Hmm.
lot of new, really high quality titles coming out. I love strategy games. One of the things that inspires me the most is just seeing how this specific publisher called Hooded Horse has been
Oh yeah.
able to amass so many strategy games that again is more of the like the plus one, like do something but then plus one, and they've really been able to gather a portfolio of games that are really interesting, and I just think that it's a trend that spreads across the market. So just think of what is it that you can bring new that it really improves the whole experience, that maybe it makes it unique, and uh, it has been so successful this year. There's been so many examples, like these last 12 months, that I really
Yeah.
think that it would be it's an inspiration of how to try to look at the market, and at the same time, on the mobile side, yes, we talked about at the beginning how the budgets for marketing are really important, how the things are uh, more and more competitive, but at the same time, there is still room for uh, a new group of people to launch something and suddenly to scale very very strongly. And we had just an example at the end of last year, right, with Pixel Flow and the whole team there.
Yeah.
So just because there's a lot of big players in the market already doesn't mean that uh, with a really high quality product and a good team that you cannot achieve your own success. So this is what I really love about the games industry is there's always room for the next innovation, um, and to just create your own presence without having to go like on a complete exploration and into the unknown and being kind of in loops for many years. I think it's like sometimes can happen. Sometimes amazing things can come out of it, but I wouldn't advise most people to do that because there's a high chance of getting stuck because you have a bit of survivorship bias in those stories.
Oh, there's a lot of survivorship bias, particularly in the indie community, sadly, um, and it's one of those fascinating things to overcome sometimes. Your expectation based on that one game you loved working, that then means that all games like that will work, and sadly, it's not true. Um, but I love your point about plussing. It's a good reminder for me, and I think that continues to be really important. Keeping things simple and doing the thing in that game that is loved more. I think that's a really good strategy, and I think that for me personally, it's really important for people to pay attention to what's going on in the market, but also to then apply it to the experience for their consumer. But at the end of the day, it's got to be for the consumer of your game. That player is the one that matters for me. On that note, Guillaume, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. If people want to find out more about what you do and want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I used to be more active when I was there. My previous role, when I was at Newzoo, I had a lot of posts and thoughts and different things. I'm a bit more held back these days because of a big corporate and things change.
Inevitably, and understandably. Yeah.
But you can just find me. The name is not that easy to type, but yeah, Guilherme Fernandes. And
It'll be
you'll
in the
find
show
me there.
notes. Don't worry. All good stuff. So I thank you very much for that. And so this has been your Game Dev Local podcast. I've been your host, Oscar Clark, and hope you enjoyed that. And given the timing of it, I can't help but the inevitable plug. Don't forget that the book is out, Playing with Balance. Don't worry, that'll be in the show notes as well, I'm sure. But we'll be back again next time where we'll be exploring more things related to the game development process. And if you enjoy this stuff, then please like, subscribe, share, and go and talk to the community. There's a great Discord community out there for Game Dev Local waiting to hear what you have to say. Until next time, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for having me.